again for having me on this script conference. I appreciate it and I'm honored. So a little bit about me. My name is Tom Gagliano. I have a master's degree in social work, a CMAT certificate in drugs and alcohol. I'm a best-selling author, and I facilitate groups for recovering addicts, for couples, for individuals. So let us begin. So we're going to discuss talking to our kids about the tough stuff, the stuff that's going on today in our society that is really not easy to talk about. You know, we've never had situations with the amount of violence, to talk to our kids about death, to talk about kids about divorce, to talk about sex and all these things. And it's not easy. And no matter what we do as parents, it's hard to keep our kids away from the media, from television, from all those influences. It's not easy. So today and tomorrow, my presentations are going to be how to develop the right kind of communications, because we want our children to talk to us, to solicit information. We certainly don't want them to solicit that information from the wrong people. So one of the keys today that I'm going to talk about is 7 essential areas in parenting that will help you in every one of these areas that we're talking about. 7 key areas. A little bit about me. I really didn't come from a good childhood. I came from a very dysfunctional childhood. My father was an alcoholic, a multiply blessed addict that would only come home at night when he was drunk and he was out to hurt someone. And my mother was a kid herself when I was born. So I didn't have a lot of areas where I felt safe enough to talk about my struggles. So when I was abused in Catholic school by a religious figure, it was twofold. One is that I was abused. The second one was I wasn't able to talk to anybody about it. And that's really the most important thing that happened to me in my childhood. So about 20 years ago, I left the world of business and I had 2 goals. One was to give my children what I didn't have as a kid, a safe place, a place to share their feelings, whatever those feelings were. My second goal was to help other people that were in their lives by their negative childhood messages and by their the experiences they received in their childhood. So I want to begin at the beginning. Childhood messages. Everything begins in the home. You know, we have a lot of messages in our lives. We have messages from media, society, peers, and all of those messages are powerful, but none are as important as those we receive early in our childhood from our parents. Those messages early on will dictate the intimacy we have or don't have, our parenting skills, the careers we choose, even the roles we play. The jobs you have today, the roles you play today are influenced and molded by those early messages. And those messages weren't just verbal, they were nonverbal too. Some of us came from families where mom or dad made this disappointing look on their face, and it carried a tremendous message into our psyche. And the messages we receive early on show up in our adult life, especially when we feel intimate or we get emotionally intimate with people. That's when those messages come to fruition. So I want to share first and foremost a story with my son that he brought this to me in the best message he could. He's about 7 years old and we were watching a baseball game. And he said, "Gee, Dad, why are those kids rooting so hard for their favorite baseball player?" Well, I said, "Those baseball players are the heroes." He thought about what I said, and he said, "You know, Dad, they may be my heroes someday, but you're always going to be my first hero." A profound message, and one that I never forgot, because we are our children's first heroes, whether we want that responsibility or not. So the messages we implant in our children will be the way they see the world and the way the world sees them. So before I get into some of these 7 essentials, I want to talk about just a few other things. First of all, controlling our children. Controlling our children never works. Why? Because when they get old enough, they're going to do what they want to do, not what we tell them to do. Let me give you another way to do this. What about instilling in our children the values that they need so that they control their own behavior? So they take healthy actions, not because we're telling them to, because we want them to. Oh, I'm sorry, because they want to, not because we want them to, because they want to take those healthy actions. That's what I'm going to talk about. And that'll flow right into all of these other areas that are so tough for us to talk to our children about. Overindulging our children. When our children are struggling, is it best to just buy them something, or is it good to learn and teach them how to talk and process their feelings with us? Very important, learning how to process their feelings with us, because if they don't, they will not know how to process their feelings with their significant other when they grow into adulthood. So it's important for us to teach them that. Who else is going to teach them that? Now, don't get me wrong. You know, children get a lot of other messages from media. Media teaches our children how they should act, how they should look, what clothes they should wear, what food they should buy. It's very brainwashing. So we have to give our children the unconditional messages that the media doesn't give them, that they're lovable just the way they are. They don't have to look a certain way or act a certain way, that they're good to go. Taking away some of the messages that the media gives them. Society's messages. Society teaches dads and men that somehow they shouldn't share their feelings. Somehow they're wimps. We talk about this all the time in the men's group I facilitate. No, anybody that doesn't know how to process or share their feelings with others will eventually act out their feelings in destructive ways. Yeah. So I teach in group how to empathetically share your feelings in a healthy way, empathize with whoever you're talking to, and put boundaries down if you need to, because society's not going to help us with that. Society tells us men should act and think in certain ways, which are not healthy. Peer messages. The more your child feels good about themselves, the less likely they're going to listen to other people who disagree with their values. It's very powerful, peer messages. But the more I value myself, the less I'm going to adhere to what somebody else tells me that I don't value. So we want to build a child that grows up with integrity and self-esteem, that can face the world that way. Not that they do the wrong thing because they're looking for what they didn't get in their childhood, validation and recognition. So let's talk about egocentricity. All children, no matter who they are, rich, poor, doesn't matter. They all grow up the same way. They're egocentric. What does that mean? It means the world revolves around them. And what do children want more than anything? They want to feel important to their parents. I can tell you from my childhood that because I didn't feel important to my parents, it wasn't my parents I stopped loving. It was myself I stopped loving. And I acted out with every addiction that there was. Again, when I don't feel like I matter to my parents, it's not my parents I stopped loving. It's me I stopped loving. Very important to understand that. And it'll be acted out with addictions, domestic violence, substance abuse, bullying, or acted in with depression and isolation, for sure. That's why I facilitate my groups. People that come from bad childhoods become fragmented, two pieces. They break in two. One piece they show the world, and then there's the inner self that they dare not show anyone for fear of rejection, of disappointment. So my job in my groups, my individual sessions, is to get the person to become congruent, oneself, where they're confident enough to share how they feel. Very important to understand what egocentric is. Even when a parent dies, a child may feel angry, like, why did you abandon me? Of course, the parent didn't abandon them, but at a young age, the child feels abandoned. When parents work all the time, doing the best they can for their child may not feel like, oh, mom and dad, or just mom, are doing the best to get me into school, to move to a better place. They may feel, why don't they pay more attention to me? It's important to know that, to give your child quality time, even if you can't give them quantity time. Check in with them. What was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? How you doing? Be curious. I'll get into that in a little while. So again, childhood message is so important. So I'm going to share another little tidbit about myself that'll show you how important messages are. You know, I can never figure out that whenever I was sick and ill in my adult life, I had a warm, wonderful feeling that came over me. It sounds nuts, right? Why would somebody who's sick feel good? And I figured it out. I had a dad that really never wanted to be with me, and I knew that. I had cancer when I was a kid. And here's the funny thing about the cancer. My father used to take me for treatments. It was the only time I felt like I mattered to him. It gave me a wonderful feeling. I mattered. That's why these messages are so important and carry throughout our whole life. Even when I get sick today, there's a crazy warm feeling that comes over me. Doesn't make sense unless you know what my childhood messages were. Then it makes perfect sense. So now I'm going to branch off into those 7 areas, and I'm going to ask poll questions. I'm kind of going a little quick, and I apologize for that. I couldn't get on right away. Usually I hand out poll questions. So I'll go over the 7 areas, and I'll ask you to rate your own questions, okay? Number 1 means you don't do this at all with your children. Number 2, you do it sometimes with your children. Number 3, you do it most of the time with your children. And number 4, you always do it with your children. So those are the 4 questions. Let's go on to number 1. Number 1, create a safe environment for your children where they can share their feelings, whatever those feelings are. What do I mean? If a child feels that their feelings are important, they will feel that they're important. The child feels like their feelings are not important, they will feel like they're not important. So I urge all parents out there to validate your child's feelings. You do not have to agree with them. You don't have to agree with them. Just say, I hear you. I hear you. Make them feel like their feelings count. That's the first very important thing that I created with my kids. And believe me, my daughters tell me a lot more than I want to know. So I'll tell you right now. But anyway, number 1, how well do you do that? How well do you create an environment for your children that you validate their feelings, even if you don't agree with them? That's number 1. Number 2, when your child is struggling, do you confer with your inner child? What do? When you see they're hurting, maybe their heart was broken, maybe they made an error in a big situation, maybe they failed a test they studied for. Before you jump in, stop and think, what would you want to hear from your children at that age? Let that compassion guide what you say and the way you say it. It's important. I always tell the story about my son at a baseball game, that he was pitching in a baseball game and he didn't pitch well. And he was really down on himself. And I remember I went to the dugout after the game to help him, to console him. Now, when I went in the dugout, I said, what hat should I wear? Should I wear a therapist hat? Maybe ask him how he feels. Maybe I'll wear a baseball hat and help him with his follow through. Well, he helped me. I walked in the dugout right in front of his 17-year-old friends. He said, Dad, I need a hug. That's all he needed. He needed a hug. He didn't need a coach. He didn't need a therapist. He needed a hug from his first hero, his father. Just what I would have wanted when I was hurting at that age. A hug from my hero. So when your child struggles, don't jump in and fix it and tell them what to do. Rather, pause and think about what you would have wanted to hear as a child. So we go to the poll questions. How well do you do that? Not at all. Sometimes, always, most of the time. That's number 2. Number 3, curious with your children. We need to know what sites our children are on. You know, that computer's a wonderful thing, but we got kids looking at porn at 11 years old now. It's very dangerous. Be curious. What sites are they on? What are they looking at? Who's their friends? Who's their friend's family? It's important to know that. Kids are addicted to screens today. They hear the beep of the text, the computer. They're done. The dopamine's going crazy. Be curious with your children. They may look at you like you're a pain in the neck. Who cares? The message is that they're important to you. That's the message. So number 3 is be curious with your children. So number 4, monitor your inner critic. Be aware of the messages you're handing down to your children. I wrote a book called The Problem Was Me. It's about this intrusive inner voice that lived with me my whole childhood. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't lovable. All of this thing. I needed to challenge that voice, or else I was going to hand it right to my children. And my God, I didn't want to do that. Monitor your inner critic. What are the messages you're handing them? Are you showing them that asking for help is courageous? Are you asking for help? Do you apologize when you're wrong? Do you say you're sorry? Monitor your inner critic. Work on your own shortcomings so you can pass that message to your children that it takes courage to work on yourself. That's number 4. Monitor your inner critic. Again, 1, not at all. Sometimes I do it. Most of the time I do it. I always do it. This isn't a test to judge anyone in here. It's a test to become aware of what areas you can work on. Number 5, choose your battles. Do you got to win them all with your children? Really? Do you always tell your children, I told you that? I told you that was going to happen. Does that help? Does it help, or does it push them away and not want them to talk to you the next time? Choose your battles. When can you give up being right and just listen and maybe let them fall a little bit? Children need to know how to fail, don't they? Talk about that in a little while. Don't we all fail at times? I do. What's the message? When you fail, that you just decompose? Or do you scrape it off and say, what did I learn, and go on from there? So choose your battles with your children. We don't have to win every battle. Okay? Number 6, permit mistakes. Very important. Again, filters right into, we need to give our children the message that if they make mistakes, it doesn't mean they are a mistake. If they fail, it doesn't mean they're a failure. I could not make a mistake. I was beat up and destroyed. That's why in my life, I always had to be right. Being wrong, I couldn't handle it. If I'm wrong, black and white thinking, I'm dead. I could not deal with being wrong. I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. We need to give our children that. Now listen carefully. It doesn't mean we don't give them consequences. It's very important to know that. It's important to teach our children when they make choices in life, there's a consequence with it. You don't put your toys away, you can't play with your toys tomorrow. You don't come in at 9 o'clock, you can't go out tomorrow. You break the law, you can go to jail. Choices we make. That's what we need to teach our children. The choices they make will have the consequence that bestows them. We want, again, to create a child with integrity and self-esteem that could face the world with value, to show up and be strong and empowered. That's important. So making mistakes. Another quick little story. This one is a little weird. Anyway, but I'm a little weird. So my youngest son was a bedwetter. And he was so ashamed, he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I would get angry, of course, which wasn't his fault. I had to learn that. And I remember one day I went to the restaurant with my family and with him. I went into the public urinal. And, sometimes guys, when we're finished, we get some drops on our pants. Okay, let me put it to you like that. So I come back to the table and I'm sitting down and I say to him, he's 5. I said, hey, Tommy, look, Dad peed in his pants. He thought this was hysterical. He thought it was the greatest thing he ever heard. My dad, my hero, could make mistakes. Now, I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence, but he stopped wetting his bed. The part of the story that I didn't anticipate was that he was going to tell everybody at the table that his dad peed in his pants. I didn't know that was going to happen. But the point of the story was that I freed him and gave him permission to make mistakes, to know that we can move forward when we do make mistakes. So the last piece, number 7, 6 was permit mistakes, 1 through 4, not at all, 2 sometimes, 3 most of the time, 4 always. Do we allow our children to make mistakes? I know I'm rushing a little bit, I apologize. Number 7, celebrate your child's victories. When your child does something that they're proud of, celebrate it. I don't care if you think it's great, if they think it's great, take them for a cup of coffee, a slice of pizza, make a big deal about it. So they colored within the lines, that's great. Make a big deal about it. Help them learn to celebrate their victories in life. Now, I don't like that everybody gets a trophy garbage, because that's not life. Life is not about everybody gets a trophy, okay? We got to teach our children that there's times you don't get a trophy. Times you make mistakes, you fail. We got to learn how to deal with failure. When your child's in trouble, don't rush in and fix it. Pause. Let them talk to them. How could they get out of their own messes? Let them learn coping mechanisms so that they learn to get out of their own. And now if they're in impending danger, absolutely jump in. But let them learn coping mechanisms and how to get out of their own messes. So it's important to do this. Now I'll give you another example with my son where I incorporate all of this stuff. I know I'm running 5 minutes, Deb, but my son came to me in high school, and he was curious with trying some drugs. He was hanging out with these kids. And what did I want to tell him? I wanted to say, okay, you want to try drugs? I'm a recovering addict. I want to say, get in your room till you're about 30 years old, then I'll let you out. I couldn't do that. I paused. I validated, first of all, that he trusted me enough to come to me. said, thank you. I appreciate that. And then I went in curiosity. Let's talk about drugs. What happens? Let's go on the computer. What happens when people take drugs? How do they hurt themselves and their family? And we spoke, and I told them the consequences. You take drugs, you're breaking the law. You could go to jail. We had discussions about it. So here's the end of the story. Here's the end. The beautiful piece was that he came to me weeks later and he said to me, Dad, I don't hang out with those kids anymore. Now, I could have twisted his arm and forced him not to hang out with those kids, which is what I wanted to do, honestly. But I didn't. What was good, he made that decision on his own. We want our children to make healthy decisions because they want to, not because we're twisting their arm and making them make these decisions. So it's very important to understand that's what we want to instill in our children. It's very important. So I'm going to go into, excuse me, some credentials. I'm a little hesitant, but here we go. If you want to follow me, you can go to my YouTube is Thomas Gagliano. If you want to follow me and learn more about me, my podcast, anyway, you listen to podcasts, if you put The Problem Was Me in the podcast, you can find me on all my podcasts. I have 24 of them, which is the website, which is the name of my first book. And my wife totally agreed that The Problem Was Me was a great title for my book. I said, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So that's the title of my book. I also have a special 40% off of my digital products if you put in Script Conference 20 and you want to order any of my digital products, and it comes with a free book. Okay, enough of that. So tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern, I'll discuss how we utilize these 7 key areas in discussing all of these tough subjects with our children. How we incorporate these 7 key areas and we push it right into talking to them about drugs, violence, sex, death, divorce, and we'll work it out slowly. We'll itemize it so you can see how creating these 7 keys can help you keep the door open with your children. Please, we want our children to talk to us. We don't want them to go to the wrong people for information. That's not what we want. But they won't do it unless they feel like their feelings matter and they matter. And that doesn't mean you're their best friend. You put your consequences down based on the choices they make. So I hope that this helped, and I hope that you take whatever you can out of this. You don't have to agree with everything I'm saying. Take what you can that you can use, leave the rest. That's fine. If you can take a few things that'll help you in your parenting, we're good to go. So
and just to let you know, all of his books are on the script resource page and Dr. Deborah's Things and More that has been sent out, and you can buy them there. You can also link yourself if you go into the script page. We just put something up about Tommy, a big old picture and all his information, and you can click on it and go right to Instagram and go to his website and go to The Problem Was Me. We'll make sure that it's there with all the links and get all of his digital products. So
doesn't she say that better than me? Doesn't she? I mean, come on. Thank you.
That's a lot of practice, Tommy.
Yep.
All right. So thank you guys so much for hanging in there. And thank you, Tommy Gagliano, for doing this for me and all of the people who have hung in. And what we're going to do is if you